All right, we are live. Welcome back to Fast Free Economics. So I said that I would give you an update on the labor market shortage, and today I want to do that. Specifically, there's been this question that's been hanging in the air, being debated by economists, policymakers, about whether the enhanced unemployment benefits are resulting in people staying away from the workplace, and whether ending those benefits would have a beneficial effect in terms of further motivating them to return to their work, to the office or factories or wherever they happen to work. Now, I realize there are some political aspects to this question, but I want to assure you that I'm going to stay away from that because that's the whole point of my channel, is to remove the political spin, look at the objective economic data, and give you some clarity about what's really happening in the economy. And so we're getting some new data coming in, and what's really happening is that the unemployment benefits are being ended. They're coming to a conclusion in a number of states, while other states are continuing with the jobless benefits. So it's actually a nice experiment. This is really interesting for an economist to look at the data. And so we're going to dive deep into that question. So we're going to answer the question, what is the impact of ending those benefits? We'll crunch the numbers, and I'll give you my final thoughts at the end of this video. But to let you know right away, with regards to the preliminary data, let me just bring that up on the screen here. So the early results are showing that, in fact, cutting benefits does not result in a significant and proportional jump in the number of workers that are going back into the workforce. So if that's the answer that you needed, feel free to click away. Like I said, I don't engage in clickbait, so that's the summary of the points that I'm going to make. But if you'd like to find out about the actual data and what are the factors impacting, this return to work, and also, what's generally really happening with the labor force, stick around, and we're going to start digging into the numbers. Specifically, we are going to look at what's happening with the with unemployment in general. Like I said, the cutoff of unemployment benefits in much of the country was meant to bring a flood of workers back to the job market. So far, the flood looks more like a trickle. Right, a total of 26 states, all but one with Republican governors. Again, we're going to stay away from the politics, but this is a statement of fact. Have moved to end all or to end some or all of the expanded unemployment benefits that have been in place since the pandemic began. The governors, along with many business owners, have argued that the benefits discourage returning to work when many employers are struggling to hire. Now, we know for a fact that, in fact, yes, many employers are, in fact, struggling to hire. And so let's dig into this question, right? How much of a benefit is it to cut off the jobless benefits? So we are going to look at statements from Rob Kaplan. He is the president of the Dallas Federal Reserve. And the reason why we'd want to pay attention to what he says is that the Federal Reserve typically has access to data that is not publicly available. And they are staffed with analysts who are particularly experienced and adept at analyzing this kind of data, right? So, according to his statement, right, I felt for some time, and I've said this publicly, that the unemployment benefits were only one piece of the larger puzzle, Kaplan told Bloomberg, right? And so in this interview, he's breaking down some of the factors that could be contributing to the current tightness in the labor market. And he is confirming that according to the data that he's seeing, that the enhanced federal unemployment benefits are not the primary factor, right? So what's really going on here, right? And in addition to that, so we have the statement from the president of the Dallas Federal Reserve as confirmation. The Labor Department also released data with regards to, the 5 states experienced the fastest job growth in July, which is Vermont, Hawaii, North Carolina, Rhode Island, and Alaska. And all those states have retained at least some of the federal benefits, right? Overall, according to the data from the Labor Department, overall states that have ended some or all of the benefits have experienced slightly slower job growth since April than states that have continued the benefits. Although economists, as we are often wont to do, caution that the data was volatile and that the benefits were only one of many ways that the states differ from one another. So, what are we to take away from just this information right here? Number one is I would echo the comments of other economists saying the data that's coming in is still preliminary, right? It's certainly pointing in a certain direction right now, but it's still preliminary. So we don't want to say the question has been settled to a final conclusion. The other thing is that the states that have ended benefits are not actually seeing a major jump in job growth, right? And we're going to talk later in the video about the factors that are leading up to that. But to kind of dig further into the evidence here, right? So let's take a look at this chart, right? So this is a chart showing the states that have kept federal benefits and states that have cut federal benefits, right? And not to drag into all the details about this chart, but the gap between the benefits in terms of the states that have cut benefits and kept benefits is about 35% at the end of July. That is quite significant, right? You would think that this would have an impact on participation in the labor market. But let's take a look at the other chart right here. So this is a chart of the same states that have cut benefits and have kept the benefits. And it's showing the resulting percentage rise in employment, right? And the title of the chart kind of gives it away, which is that it's a small rise in employment, right? In fact, the gap between one state versus the other is about 4.4%. So the states that cut benefits did see an increase in worker participation, but it was a small increase, 4.4%. And as an economist, I'd have to say, I'm not sure at this point with such a small increase that it's not statistical noise, right? We can't really attribute it as a firm conclusion that it was cutting benefits as opposed to other factors that are happening in a particular state. So let's summarize the data so far, right? We know that the gap in terms of benefits is 35%, right? The amount that was cut, but the resulting increase in employment is only 4.4%. So that begs the question, exactly what's happening here? Because intuitively, you would think if you're paying people to stay home and not work, because really that was the point of the whole thing, right? During the pandemic, right? We're paying workers to stay home and still have a roof over their heads. And that would help to contain the spread of the virus. But, you would think, well, we take that support away, people are going to get back to work. But that's not really what's happening here. And so we need to start asking the question about exactly what's going on. So let's dig into that, right? And so one of the economists who studied this, Michael Stepner, he's a University of Toronto economist, is basically saying, quote, the labor market didn't pop after you kick these people off. Most of these people are not finding jobs, and it's going to take them a long time to get their earnings back, right? So he's pointing to the fact that even though you've taken that support away, in terms of finding a match between the worker and the employee, it could be more problematic than we might think, right? Because it's not simply a matter of somebody saying, hey, I see a job opening, I'm going to apply. There's a fitness question that's also relevant. You have to have a background and skill set that fits that particular position. So there is some friction in people returning to the workforce, especially if you've been out of it for some months, right? And so recognizing that friction helps to explain why, so far, with the cut of the federal benefits, helps explain why there hasn't been a mass surge back into the workforce, right? And so, to summarize some of the points, Employers are still scrambling to find workers as shortages persist and workers won't return. Rob Kaplan, as I said, president of the Dallas Federal Reserve, um, talked about what might be driving this, and the fact is, workers are retiring, dropping out to be caregivers, and reeling from virus fear. So let's look at some of that in more detail, right? So Kaplan cites the number of workers retiring as one big factor in the current crunch, right? This is really, really important data. This is data typically reserved for the Federal Reserve. And when they're quoting a study that they perform, it pays to listen, right? So the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City found that the number of people retiring rose by 3.6 million from February 2020 to June 2021, a 1.3% increase, far higher than the prior decade's average annual increase of 0.3%. So, yeah, I mean, that's an additional 1 point when typically you get only about 3/10 of a point in terms of number of workers who are retiring. So, obviously, that's going to have a factor. They are no longer available to go back to work because, ta-da, they retired, right? So, that's one factor there. And of course, as mentioned, caregiving has emerged as another reason workers aren't returning, as schools and childcare centers alike are shuttered for in-person instruction. Kaplan said that approximately 1.5 million caregivers have left the workforce. That's a lot. 1.5 million caregivers, right? And an analysis from the Federal Reserve Board of Governors found that labor force non-participation associated with caregiving went up by 0.7% from January and February 2020 to April and May of 2021. So there's another drop in the number of people who are available to actually enter the workforce, because a lot of people are saying, I've got my kids still at home. I need to take care of them, right? And even if the unemployments go away, that need is not changing, right? So, and additional friction in terms of people getting back into the workforce, right? And of course, the final reason, something that's hovering in the air for all of us, myself included, by the way, workers are still very concerned about the ongoing and more infectious pandemic. The Delta variant has already made a dent on the economy and how Americans perceive it. So, quoting Kaplan, he's saying that we will not see a step backward in the economy, but we might not see the progress we were hoping to see. So, let me add to this in the sense that, I did a previous video where I talked about the possible impact of Delta variant on the economy and some of the risk factors. So, if you want to learn more about that, go ahead and watch that video. I'm also going to make a follow-up video about the Delta variant impact on the economy, because after I made that video, right, the Friday job numbers came out and they were lower than expected. So the question is, was that the Delta variant? And if so, what does that mean for the U.S. economy? That is something that I'm going to address in the follow-up video after this. But anyways, getting back to the labor force, so Kaplan continues saying, I think it's going to delay the matching process between businesses who are trying to hire workers and workers stepping into the economy. Okay, so we started with a question of, a jobless benefits ending and the kind of intuitive understanding that should motivate people to get back to work, because obviously you need to earn a living. But there are 3 additional factors that are making it very difficult. One is retirement. They decided, I've had enough. I'm leaving the workforce. I'm collecting my pension, cashing in my 401k or whatever resources that they have, and decide to retire. And then we've got the caregiver. What was it? 1.3 million caregivers leaving the economy and making it very difficult for parents to find childcare for their kids who are also at home, so that they can go back to the workforce. So that's another friction that's preventing people from going back to work. And of course, the ever-present Delta variant and the overall pandemic itself. It's still an issue. Our vaccination rate continues to improve, but I think people are starting to realize that, these variants are going to persist, right? The vaccination has certainly allowed the economy to recover, right, to the extent that we have. And I really doubt that we're going to go into full lockdown in any place in this country for the near future. But still, as Kaplan has pointed out, that doesn't mean that there's no impact. It can create difficulties in terms of people getting back to work. It's creating supply chain management issues. It's creating a lot of negative impacts on the economy, right? And so, it's not simply a question of the jobless benefits, right? They're only one factor, and it turns out, according to the data so far, they are not the biggest factors that are preventing workers from returning to the workforce. So, anyways, so that policy question for now is leaning toward the direction that the jobless benefits are not as impactful as we might have first thought, right? So there you go. We need to continue to monitor the situation, continue to review the data, and as I said before in my previous updates on the labor market, we probably won't know the final answer to this until sometime next year. But anyways, so I hope you found that helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.